By early 2020, the Lake Chad region had become a battlefield of attrition. For years, Boko Haram fighters had used the islands and swamps of Lake Chad as a sanctuary, slipping between borders, evading aerial surveillance, and launching attacks into Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. The area was a perfect hideout, vast, remote, and nearly impossible to control. Chad's military had long contributed to regional counterinsurgency efforts. Its troops were known for discipline and mobility, often operating far beyond the country's borders to assist allies. But in the early months of 2020, Chad's presence along the lake had been reduced, a rotation delay, possibly due to COVID-19 restrictions and internal redeployments, left some bases lightly manned. Boko Haram noticed. On the night of March 23, 2020, the group made its move. The attackers belonged to the faction of Boko Haram, led by Abubakar Shekau, a militant leader notorious for his brutality, erratic command style, and refusal to accept even ISIS leadership after their 2016 split. His fighters arrived in waves by speedboats, motorcycles, and on foot, emerging from the marshland like phantoms. Shekau's men had long used the Lake Chad Islands as forward operating bases, smuggling weapons and launching ambushes across borders. The Bohoma strike was his boldest move in years and his most costly. As darkness fell over the Bohoma Peninsula, Boko Haram launched a coordinated ambush on the lightly defended Chadian Army base. The soldiers were caught off guard. Some had just returned from patrol. Others were asleep in tents when the first grenades exploded. Armed with RPGs, heavy machine guns, and AK-47s, the militants overran the perimeter and torched supply tents. Radio calls for reinforcements came too late. By morning, over 90 Chadian soldiers were dead, the deadliest single-day loss in Chad's military history. Vehicles burned. Communications gear was stolen. Some survivors swam across the lake to escape. It wasn't just a raid, it was a statement. And it would provoke a response unlike anything Boko Haram had faced before. Chad's President Idriss Déby didn't wait for condolences. He issued an immediate order. We have lost men. We will not mourn in silence. We will respond. A new campaign was born, Operation Wrath of Boma, not as a patrol, not as containment, as retribution. The morning after the Bohoma massacre, Chad woke up in mourning and rage. The images were devastating. Burned-out trucks, shattered bunkers, bodies of young soldiers pulled from the sand. In one night, Boko Haram had inflicted the deadliest military loss in Chad's modern history. For a country that prided itself on battlefield toughness, the blow was deeply personal. But there would be no delay in response. Just hours after the attack, President Idriss Déby convened an emergency meeting with senior commanders. Reports indicated that the assault had been carried out by Boko Haram's Shekau-led faction, using camps hidden across Lake Chad's remote islands. These weren't random militants, they were coordinated, prepared, and deeply entrenched. Déby's response was swift and decisive. A new military campaign was declared, Operation Wrath of Boma. This wasn't to be a defensive measure or symbolic retaliation. It would be a systematic offensive designed to uproot Boko Haram's presence from Chadian territory entirely. Over 5,000 troops were mobilized within days. Multiple divisions were pulled from internal security posts and redirected to the lake. Dozens of armored trucks, technicals, and mobile artillery units were deployed. Flat-bottom patrol boats and light amphibious craft were readied for island assaults. Even helicopters and reconnaissance drones were diverted to the operation. Déby didn't stay in N'Djamena. He flew to the front lines, personally establishing forward command posts on the lake's western shore. For the president, this wasn't just war. It was reputation, justice, and national pride on the line. Before the first counterattack was launched, one objective was made clear. We will clear every island. We will bury every camp. Boko Haram will never again strike from Chadian soil. Lake Chad's terrain is as much an enemy as the militants themselves. Shallow marshlands, muddy islets, and dense reeds made it a perfect zone for guerrilla warfare. Boko Haram used it to hide, smuggle, and launch ambushes undetected. But the Chadian Army had learned. Trucks were modified for amphibious use. Boats were deployed in swarms. Special forces parachuted into key zones. This time, the battlefield would not slow them down. From March 31st, the Chadian Army unleashed wave after wave of assaults on island strongholds. Troops landed by water and air. Surprise was total. Boko Haram fighters were still asleep in huts when the first bursts of fire landed. Camps were overrun. Weapons were seized. Dozens of boats were destroyed before militants could escape. In the first 72 hours, dozens of camps were cleared across islands like Kelkua, Ngarwa, and Chukatalia. Mortars silenced dugouts. Explosives collapsed tunnel systems. The offensive was relentless. Captured commanders later admitted they were unprepared. One reportedly said, "They came like water." Then fire. "We had no escape." What set Operation Wrath of Boma apart wasn't just its speed or firepower, it was how it was executed. This was not a top-down campaign led from a distant capital. It was a battlefield operation directed in real time by the president himself. Déby personally established mobile command posts near the front. He moved with assault columns, issuing direct orders based on real-time intelligence. There was no delay between surveillance, decision, and execution. The Chadian forces adapted brilliantly to terrain. Motorized infantry operated on modified Hilux trucks capable of traversing marsh and shallow water. Amphibious units landed with speedboats. Special forces, often inserted at night, moved ahead of the main force, mapping camps, locating fighters, and marking artillery targets. Drone reconnaissance and forward spotters relayed GPS positions back to strike teams. Helicopters provided close air support. Mortar teams adjusted in real time to suppress escape routes. Each island assault was a multi-directional raid, designed to confuse, encircle, and overwhelm. Leaflets were dropped before certain raids, warning fighters to surrender. Loudspeakers blasted surrender messages. Some camps gave up. Others fought and were eliminated. It was fast, coordinated, and ruthless. By the time Chad's flag flew over the final island, Boko Haram's Lake Chad network had been broken. As the Chadian Army overran one camp after another, the big question loomed. Where was Abubakar Shekau? He was nowhere near the battlefield. Intelligence sources later revealed that Shekau had withdrawn into deep forest territory inside Nigeria days before the counteroffensive began, possibly tipped off, or perhaps unwilling to risk direct confrontation. His foot soldiers were left behind to absorb the backlash. Camps loyal to him were leveled. Supply routes collapsed. Communications gear was seized. Shekau's evasion preserved his life, but shattered his operational credibility. By mid-April, Chad announced the operation's results. Over 1,000 Boko Haram fighters killed. Dozens of island bases destroyed. Stockpiles of RPGs, IEDs, and rifles seized. And in a bizarre twist, 44 captured Boko Haram fighters later committed suicide in custody using poison allegedly smuggled in by accomplices. The operation was a devastating success. But it also raised questions. Why did such an operation only happen after such heavy losses? And why hadn't regional allies launched parallel offensives? President Déby voiced his frustration. Chad has done its part. Others must act. Operation Wrath of Boma ended in April 2020, but its impact was clear. Boko Haram activity in Chad dropped sharply. Recruitment slowed. Supply routes were crippled. And Shekau, once seen as untouchable, began losing territory and followers. 1 year later, President Déby himself died on a northern front while leading troops against rebels, cementing his reputation as a battlefield leader. But his final victory was the blow dealt to Boko Haram's core in Lake Chad. The Chadian Army's 2020 offensive wasn't just retaliation. It was a calculated military campaign, a message written in precision and fire. Boko Haram had struck, but this time the state struck back, harder, faster, and without hesitation. It was more than a battle. It was a reckoning. Boko Haram's defeat in Lake Chad wasn't the end, because in the shadows, a splinter group was rising. Ansaru, silent, disciplined, backed by Al-Qaeda. They rejected Shekau's chaos, but not the cause. And now they're returning, smarter, deadlier, and harder to stop. In our next episode, we uncover the quiet resurgence of Ansaru, the forgotten faction you should be watching. Subscribe now. The next chapter is just beginning.